Good morning. I call this hearing to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Let me begin by saying that standing House and committee rules and practice will continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they are expected to adhere to these standing rules, including decorum. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceedings, so please keep your cameras on. Also, please remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. If you have to participate in another proceeding, please exit this one and log back in later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party, and I will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceeding. For those members and staff physically present in the committee today, we will continue to follow the most recent OEP guidance. Masks are no longer required in our meeting space for members and staff who have been fully vaccinated. All members and staff who have not been fully vaccinated are still required to wear masks and socially distance. As new technology has made America more dependent on digital tools, malicious actors have been launching more frequent and severe cyber attacks. In the early months of 2021, we have seen a wide array of headlines detailing attacks on institutions like large corporations and municipal governments. Just yesterday, the Biden administration acknowledged that hackers affiliated with the Chinese government were responsible for hacking Microsoft email systems, compromising tens of thousands of computers worldwide and exposing reams of sensitive data. The fallout of the attack is still being evaluated, but it is estimated the hack could have affected hundreds of thousands of small businesses. Episodes like this exhibit the significant threat cyber attacks pose to small businesses. This risk has increased in recent years as small businesses have begun to rely more heavily on digital technologies. According to the Connected Commerce Council, 72% of small firms increased use of digital tools during the pandemic. Unfortunately, as digital adoption has increased, investment in security measures hasn't kept pace. Small businesses often do not have the resources to invest in an adequate cyber defense system or hire a dedicated specialist. Guarding against cyber attacks often comes with high implementation costs and substantial investment of time and resources. Many are already operating on thin margins and slim human resources, but failing to prepare for a cyber attack can have disastrous impact. Damage to information systems, regulatory fines, lost customer trust, decreased productivity, and lost income are all potential consequences of a cyber breach. Because of their structural importance to the overall economy, attacks on small firms can have severe impacts on larger enterprises and governments connected to them through the supply chain. Given the greater risk cyber attacks pose to small employers and their limited capacity to protect against them, this committee must find ways to help entrepreneurs strengthen their cybersecurity posture. Today's hearing gives us the chance to examine how existing cyber resources can be enhanced and integrated into small business support mechanisms. I also look forward to discussing new initiatives that can alleviate the financial burden of cybersecurity preparedness. Small businesses are the foundation of our economy, so their vulnerability is our nation's vulnerability. Investment in their security will make us all more secure. I would now like to yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mayor Chairwoman. In preparing for today's hearing, I'm reminded of how pervasive the use of the Internet and information technology has become in our society and in such a short period of time. We bank online, we work online. Over the past year, we have held many congressional hearings online. Our growing dependency on constantly evolving information technology is fundamentally altering the way we live and the way businesses of all sizes operate. Although the benefits springing from the utilization and adoption of new technologies are incalculable, we are forced to contend with a new threat. Specifically, the explosive growth of a criminal industry seeking to steal valuable data and manipulate critical systems for financial gain. As the world continues to embrace new technology, we increase the attack surfaces through which cyber criminals can infiltrate and wreak havoc to devastating effect. These attacks are not without consequence. The cost of cybercrime is absolutely overwhelming. Experts estimate global damages totaling $6 trillion this year alone, projected to reach a staggering $10.5 trillion annually by 2025. Because small businesses are the intended targets of cyber criminals, approximately half the time, the damage inflicted upon small businesses is catastrophic. These attacks push many to the brink, with 1 in 6 businesses reporting the financial impact materially threatening the company's future. In addition to financial costs, many are unable to recover from the loss of their intellectual property, resources, and reputation following a cyber attack. During my time with this committee as a member and now as ranking member, I have had the privilege to speak with many small businesses in my district and beyond. And I say with certainty that many small businesses do not have the resources, knowledge, and awareness to properly defend against such attacks, which is precisely what makes them attractive targets. Many lack insufficient in-house expertise to deal with these breaches, leaving it up to the small business owners themselves to handle the matter with predictable results. Make no mistake, this is asymmetrical warfare. Cybercriminals expend little effort targeting small businesses that often have fragile to non-existent cybersecurity defenses, while small businesses must allocate valuable time and precious resources to defend against this faceless enemy. While attacks against large businesses consistently make front-page news, small businesses must not be disregarded. The new reality is that large organizations are merely sprawling networks of interconnected business partners consisting of all sizes of companies, including small businesses, each a viable vector for attack. And one of the most effective means of shoring up cybersecurity defenses is knowledge. Knowledge is power, and we need to empower small businesses with the tools they need to protect themselves and, by extension, the wider network of businesses and organizations they touch. A critical component to knowledge is the need for information sharing among the public and private sectors. As fast as cybersecurity systems are established and patched, cyber criminals are already looking for, and in many cases successfully finding, new creative ways to infiltrate an organization's internal networks. Having a robust information sharing system is fundamental for a strong and effective cybersecurity defense, not just for small businesses, but for our country as a whole. Unfortunately, small businesses experience significant resistance to participating in cybersecurity information sharing activities for a variety of reasons. They may be reluctant to risk exposure to potential legal liabilities resulting from their disclosure, and they may harbor doubts regarding the government's ability to adequately protect reported data and privacy information. The federal government recognizes these concerns and has made significant strides toward alleviating these fears. However, these effects must continue to improve in order to make the most impact on small businesses which derive the digital economy's growth, innovation, and job creation. To that end, there are several pieces of bipartisan legislation introduced by my colleagues on this committee which attempt to begin resolving some of the issues and reservations small businesses have. I hope we will engage in a fruitful dialogue with our witnesses about this legislation today. Combating cyber threats is a vastly complicated issue that will require large-scale coordination across the entire federal government and private sectors. But we must not let that complexity deter us from our goal. Rather, we must redouble our efforts toward strengthening the cybersecurity of our country, starting with small businesses. I look forward to hearing the testimony of the witnesses on that, Madam Chair. Now you go back.
Thank you, Mr. Lukemeyer. The gentleman yields back. I would like to take a moment to explain how this hearing will proceed. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your microphone is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when finished. With that, I would like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Ms. Tasha Cornish, the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland, known as CAMI, located in Baltimore, Maryland. CAM is dedicated to enhancing the local cybersecurity ecosystem by offering training, cyber career networking, and the Cyber SWAT team, which is a free cybersecurity incident hotline. Ms. Cornish has nearly a decade of nonprofit leadership experience, and she earned her master's degree at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and holds a bachelor's degree in neuroscience from Cedar Crest College. Welcome, Ms. Cornish. Our next witness is Ms. Cheryl Nichols, the State Director for the Mississippi SBDC. The state's SBDC network provides business services at 15 centers and sites, including the Mississippi State University Center for Cyber Innovation. The MSU SBDC hosts a cybersecurity project to help small businesses with data protection in the wake of COVID-19. Before coming to Mississippi, Ms. Nichols spent 10 years working for the Oklahoma SBDC. Ms. Nichols has an MBA from the Northeastern State University and a bachelor's degree from the University of Central Oklahoma. The Mississippi SBDC was named Resource Partner of the Year for 2020. Congratulations and welcome, Ms. Nichols. Our third witness is Ms. Kirsten Todd, the Managing Director of the Cyber Readiness Institute, known as CRI, located in New York City. CRI provides prescriptive, accessible, and free content and tools to improve the resilience and readiness of small and medium-sized enterprises. Ms. Toast has a Master in Public Policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and earned her bachelor's degree at Princeton University. We appreciate your time and expertise, Ms. Jones. And now I yield to the ranking member to introduce our final witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome our final witness, Mr. Graham Dufault. Mr. Dufault is the Senior Director for Public Policy at ACT, the App Association, representing more than 5,000 app makers and connected device companies in the mobile economy. The App Association gives voice to small technology companies, and its mission is to help members promote an environment that inspires and rewards innovation, while providing resources to help them raise capital, create jobs, and continue developing incredible technology. Mr. Dufault is no stranger to Capitol Hill, having served as counsel for the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He now leads a number of critical public policy initiatives on behalf of the App Association members. He earned his JD with a concentration in communications law from George Mason University and a bachelor's degree in economics from Emory University. Mr. Dufault, welcome back to the Hill, and thank you for participation today. We look forward to testimony, and you're parking in a very good spot along the street this morning, by the way. Right across from my apartment. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Dufault, for being here. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Ms. Cornish, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you again for the invitation to be here. It's an honor to be here. So CAMI is a approximately 580 member association based in Maryland. So we were founded in 2015 to grow the industry. About 80% of our members are cyber providers providing products and services to small businesses and the government. The other 20% supports the industry through cyber liability, data privacy law, and other business building resources. So one of our main roles is to provide business building resources to these cyber companies, and the other is to educate small and medium-sized businesses about cyber hygiene and to provide solutions. So I'm here specifically to talk about that. I'm going to cover 3 of our programs today: our Cyber SWAT team, our variety of curated directories of products and services, and our advocacy work for financial incentives. Additionally, we do collaborative workshops with our business partners in chambers of commerce and other trade associations. And we also do workforce development initiatives to build that critical pipeline of IT and other professionals in cyber. So our Cyber SWAT team came out of this huge shift to work from home that happened last year, as mentioned before, that really expanded the threat surface that our small businesses experienced. Virtual machines, VPNs, and remote access points are commonly high targets for threat actors. So we developed the Cyber SWAT team in partnership with the state of Maryland, and it's a coordinated breach response with all components: technology providers, cyber insurance, legal and compliance, and communication and PR. So businesses who are either experiencing a breach or suspect a breach can submit the request via email, an online form, or via the phone. So within 1 hour, they'll receive a call from our triage team. We will triage their request to our best fit cyber companies based on their size, location, industry, and breach needs. So there's no cost to connect with this information, resources, or referrals. They get that 1 hour free consultation. Of course, if they do choose the services, they enter a contract and then pay for those services. But this has helped greatly to assist companies in Maryland and beyond, really, with external threats such as phishing campaigns and ransomware, and also internal threats, including when terminated employees have unauthorized access to systems. So moving further upline in the Protect and Defend section, we provide an online directory with of all of our member companies with relevant designations, including minority-owned small businesses, women-owned small businesses, service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, 8A, et cetera. So this is helpful for prime contractors and others looking for subs, government agencies, of course, but also private sector companies who prioritize diverse vendor pools. We also do publications with our local business guides, and we are launching a program now with Exelon, a Fortune 100 company that works in every stage of the energy business. I don't need to tell you that there have been some pretty high-profile breaches within that industry, and typically that's an industry that hasn't had a lot of regulations and compliance. So we are working with Exelon to connect them through our new database with providers in our membership who can help their vendors build security programs and complete assessments to really secure that supply chain for the energy industry. It's a very highly specialized industry, so many of these vendors are seeing this information for the first time, so we're pleased to partner with them to do that. Additionally, we'll be doing something similar for our DoD contractors as CMMC or Cybersecurity Maturity Model certifications come down the pipeline to, again, provide those resources to our small businesses who are doing government work. Lastly, I want to touch on some of the financial incentives that we have advocated for. So in 2018, we actively advocated for the Buy Maryland tax credit, which was approved by the Maryland General Assembly and signed by Governor Hogan. So it offers qualified Maryland businesses of fewer than 50 employees to receive a tax credit, which is worth 50% of the purchase price when they buy from qualified Maryland cyber providers of products and services. So qualified sellers are, again, small companies or companies owned by these specific designations. And this offers up to $4 million worth of tax credits each year, and it has an active directory of about 50 companies. Additionally, there are funds that come down from the federal government. So, for example, the Defense Cybersecurity Assistance Program, which again, being in Maryland, we have a lot of government contractors who do work with the DoD. So there are specific funds that we help promote that those contractors can use for assessments and remediation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. And no, I'm sorry, Ms. Cornish. And now we recognize Ms. Nichols for 5 minutes. Ms. Nichols, you need to unmute yourself, please.
It says that I'm unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. In order to survive the pandemic, many small businesses had to quickly pivot to online platforms to sell their product and shift to remote work. The small businesses of our nation are at high risk for hackers due to the inadequate cybersecurity protection for their data and intellectual property, as was discussed before. Why are they at an increased risk? Well, just like it was said, owners simply don't know how to protect their business, or they lack the funds to do so. Most hackers want money, but that's all that is at risk here. No small businesses wants its customers or clients to know that they've been breached, and it's a fear that they will lose the business or that hard-earned trust, and so many go unreported. In 2016, it was estimated that 10 to 12% of all cyber crimes were reported. In Mississippi alone, in the last couple of weeks, there was a medical clinic in our small town that had to pay a ransom to get their data back. This was never reported in the news. Just 2 weeks ago, our own office was hit by an email phishing scam. And I was given an email yesterday in regards to a heat and air company that lost a couple of weeks of work due to a scam. My name is Cheryl Nichols. I'm the State Director of the Mississippi SBDC, where we offer connection, education, and guidance for thousands of businesses across the state. In response to the cybersecurity crisis, the MSBDC allocated a portion of the CARES Act funds we received to develop a cybersecurity center to help Mississippi small businesses become cyber aware and more prepared. This center that was developed offers training based on the CMM model and the CMMC, but we call it the CMM model because we don't do certification, offering actionable steps any business owner can take. Also access to trained cybersecurity counselors for individual counseling, as well as on-demand cybersecurity workshops that are available on our website. Everything that we offer is for free. The cybersecurity maturity model that we have implemented is based on a program initiated by the U.S. Department of Defense in order to measure their defense contractors' capabilities, readiness, and sophistication in the area of cybersecurity. And we've adopted this model because it is a tool that can be personalized and expanded to meet each business's unique levels. Levels 1 through 3, and there's 5 in the CMMC model, are considered attainable by small businesses and are designed to make the securing of businesses affordable yet very effective. Please note, again, we do not offer the certification at the end of each level, but business owners can pursue that if they choose. Collaboration and connection in all our organizations is key, and it is the future. The Mississippi Cyber Initiative, we call MCI, was created to offer a central location for the exchange of ideas and beneficial information about the cybersecurity. The Air Force Base on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Mississippi State University, and Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College are part of MCI. Our organization, the Mississippi SBDC, has been invited to explore ways MCI resources can be shared with the business community. This is an example of collaboration and connection. The Mississippi SBDC serves the small businesses of our state with connection, education, and guidance. And I'd like to point out how we have applied these guiding principles in response to the cyber crisis. Through connection, we are connecting our business owners with valuable cybersecurity resources via the MSU Cybersecurity Center and the MCI and other collaborations. We are acting as a conduit for the federal, state, and local resources to the small businesses in our state. In education, we are utilizing the Cybersecurity Center to educate business owners so that they can evaluate the threat that they have and their threat level and institute measures for protection. We will be employing a variety of marketing platforms, reaching out through videos and PSAs, and pushing awareness on all 6 of our social media channels. We are working to dismantle the idea that small business owners are powerless to take charge of cybersecurity and make the processes involved simple yet effective. And finally, through guidance, we actively supply support and guidance via our one-on-one counseling with cybersecurity counselors at no cost to business owners. By supplying one-on-one guidance, business owners can get answers to specific questions and solve issues unique to their situations. And there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Our lives and livelihoods are connected via the cyber world. Small businesses play a huge part in the welfare of our communities and the nation. We must put cybersecurity and cyber safety of our businesses at the forefront of everything we do and equip them with every tool to succeed and protect their businesses. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be a voice for the small businesses of Mississippi as well as the nation. Thank you for inviting me to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Ms. Toast, now you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Lutkemeyer, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I currently serve as Managing Director of the Cyber Readiness Institute, a nonprofit effort that convenes senior executives of global companies to share resources and best practices that inform the development of free cybersecurity tools for small businesses, including the Cyber Readiness Program, a 5-step self-guided program, several guides, all based on human behavior. In 2016, I served as executive director of President Obama's Commission on Cybersecurity, and after the conclusion of the commission, several of the commissioners and myself came together to launch this effort. Relevant to the hearing today, I also served as a senior staff member on the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee before, during, and after 9/11 and helped to draft the legislation to create DHS. The assaults on our nation's digital infrastructure, particularly over the last 12 months, underscore the urgent need to close a critical gap in our nation's cyber defenses. When we think about cybersecurity, we tend to think at a macro level about state actors and state secrets, hacks of millions of online identities, and direct threats to critical infrastructure. And when we think about remedies, we tend to focus on digital giants and on national or multinational policymaking. These policy solutions are necessary and appropriate, but they are not sufficient. The threats we face as a nation and as individual consumers and citizens are not restricted to the macro level. Given that over 2/3 of large businesses outsource a portion of their functions and allow third-party access to their data, insufficient cyber protection among SMBs can be consequential for larger firms too, as we saw with SolarWinds and Kaseya. SMBs, which are constrained by limited resources and unable to invest proportionately in cybersecurity, expand our risk exposure significantly. 80% of America's businesses have fewer than 10 employees, and 95% have fewer than 100. SMBs are the backbone of our economy, but they are inherently fragile. During the pandemic, according to the SBA administrator at the time, a small business was closing every hour. These small enterprises lack the resilience to withstand a barrage of cyber attacks. Small businesses don't have the safety nets that large businesses do, and an attack of any size can challenge their viability. At the end of 2020 and earlier this year, we experienced the impact of several high-profile attacks, with impacts across multiple supply chains and critical infrastructure. We've been forced to now understand that in addition to physical supply chains, all businesses, especially small businesses, must pay attention to their IT supply chains. These events have brought us to another so-called inflection point. So-called because we use this term frequently when it comes to cybersecurity, yet we continue to fail to do what is necessary to improve America's cyber defenses. These events and attacks are symptoms of the challenges we face. Policies are not enough, nor can we simply shrink tools and techniques employed by major corporations into compact versions for SMBs. Small businesses need access to cybersecurity resources and support from the federal government. They need prescriptive, easy-to-adopt programs that strengthen their everyday operations while not pinching their budget. Because a small business may not have a department or even a single employee solely focused on cybersecurity, approaches grounded in creating cultural change through human behavior and education are critical to helping small businesses become more resilient. Human behavior can be a force multiplier for cybersecurity in small businesses and larger ones as well. Small businesses must be educated on the threats and the fundamental actions that they need to be resilient. The federal government can play a critical role. Earlier this year, the Cyber Readiness Institute released a white paper, The Urgent Need to Strengthen the Cyber Readiness of Small and Medium-Sized Businesses, a proposal for the Biden administration, outlining actions to help small businesses. Here are 5 steps from the white paper that the federal government can take to improve small business cybersecurity defenses. My prepared testimony goes into greater detail, and I'm happy to elaborate during our Q&A. Number 1, create a small business cybersecurity center. Today, no single government agency curates cybersecurity resources from multiple vetted sources for SMBs. Given the ongoing work to support SMBs by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the recent allocation of additional resources to the agency, CISA is a recommended agency to perform this function. Number 2, establish cybersecurity incentives. Tax credits to SMBs that invest in cybersecurity can incentivize cybersecurity efforts. Number 3, set cybersecurity standards. We need minimum standards for cybersecurity that all organizations must follow, including small businesses. Number 4, launch national cyber squads. We should amplify the existing cyber corps with government-funded cyber squads of student interns to help minority-owned SMBs and to fill a desperately needed talent pipeline. And number 5, roll out a national cyber readiness education campaign. Awareness is critical. For small businesses and the entire population, we need an effective public service campaign that would focus on a single basic cybersecurity issue, such as using multi-factor authentication, which experts assert would reduce cyber attacks significantly. Our nation's cybersecurity challenges are diverse. One foundational way we can improve our defenses is by supporting and investing in the cyber readiness of small businesses. America's hundreds of thousands of small businesses can be mobilized, educated, and supported to be our resilient front line of cyber defense and to become a great strength for our country. This critical investment in building that strong defense will pay major dividends for our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Todd. And now we recognize Mr. Default for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Luetkemeyer, members of the committee. My name is Graham Default, and I am Senior Director for Public Policy at ACT, the App Association. The App Association is the leading trade group representing small connected device and mobile software companies in the app economy, which is about a $1.7 trillion sector globally that supports about 5.9 million jobs in the U.S., including in your districts. I'm here to ask for your help to improve the cybersecurity resources for small businesses that are the backbone of your districts. In Brooklyn, Ali Ibarakan founded Chaperone, an app to help teachers organize and manage field trips. Jason Osterly, a former IBM and MasterCard developer, created Washmo Media in Washington, Missouri. So app economy innovators like Chaperone and Washmo deal with cyber threats all the time. Small companies, even in industries associated with a higher level of technical expertise, like our members, are a favorite target of cyber criminals. In fact, about 71% of companies reporting cyber attacks are small firms. And around 80% of small firms say they aren't prepared for a cyber attack. And most of them are reticent to tell anyone about the fact that they are victims, as you've heard from other testimony today. We want to highlight 4 main things for this hearing. Number one, while recent high-profile ransomware attacks are grabbing headlines, it is difficult for small companies to share information about threats, incidents, and defensive measures they use. Legislation like H.R. 1648 and 1649 from last Congress would help create better conditions for information sharing and readiness. So we appreciate the committee's work on those pieces of legislation, and we're pleased to see that at least one of them is being reintroduced this week. Number two, cybersecurity is a team sport in many ways. Small companies, especially app makers, leverage the cybersecurity capabilities of software platforms such as app stores, operating systems, and cloud services to protect their clients and customers. Federal policy should enable these platforms to take protective measures and should avoid undue interference with them on antitrust and other grounds. Number three, cybersecurity begins with good defenses. Small companies rely on technical protection measures like encryption of data in transit and at rest and on devices, so we urge the committee to push back on proposals that would weaken encryption. And a bonus, number four, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the number one daily issue my industry faces, and that is finding and hiring enough qualified people. With about 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally, federal investment in this area is necessary. So we support programs like the Master Teacher Corps and legislation like the Computer Science for All Act, H.R. 3602. App Association members and our customers have everything to lose when it comes to cyber threats. The onslaught of recent attacks comes amid a global talent shortage, so we can't simply hire our way out of the problem. Therefore, we need your help. Cybersecurity for mobile devices is important for everyone. For example, Black and Hispanic Americans rely disproportionately on mobile devices as opposed to desktop computers to access online services. These devices now contain our most sensitive personal data, including financial, real-time location, and health information. Therefore, app makers in particular must leverage the security features of software platforms and cloud services. Unfortunately, some proposals in Congress and in some states would prohibit these gating functions ostensibly to help my member companies and your constituents, but in truth, they would do much more harm than good. So we urge you to reject those ideas as they make smart devices much less secure and much more attractive targets. Why? Because cybercrime is a business after all, and cybercriminals benefit also from the silence of their victims. If Congress's goal is to make it harder for cybercriminals to do business, information sharing plays a key role. We need to make it too costly for cybercriminals to target small companies with $15,000 ransoms. The attacks we see on small firms from real estate investment to neighborhood bike shops are often well designed to ensnare specific kinds of victims. The attackers learn the lingo of the sector they target and study everyday practices to disguise phishing attempts so that they look legitimate. Understanding these shifting forms of camouflage requires rapid intelligence sharing, and we need to counterbalance the potential legal exposure and reputational harm of disclosure. While small companies often rely on outside support and expertise for cybersecurity, it's impossible to contract away risk or accountability for security. It's incumbent on small companies to develop a level of independent working knowledge of cyber threats to their business and information sharing best practices. The committee is well positioned to help improve cybersecurity literacy for small firms and the conditions for information sharing, and we look forward to assisting with those efforts. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Default. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I just want to say that it's kind of scary listening to your stories and your expertise regarding the threat of cybersecurity. I just would like to ask Ms. Todd, based on your own experience having worked for the government, the federal government, and now as the CEO of this institution, do you think that there is an ongoing education throughout the federal government in terms of the different agencies as to the threat that is that they are exposed to, and then how does that trickle down to those most vulnerable, in this case, small businesses?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. There's absolutely an education challenge. And when we talk to small businesses, and I think this holds true certainly for large businesses, the issue isn't that they don't know, they don't want to do anything. The issue is that they often don't know what they should be doing and where the threat is. There was a survey done by Apple recently that said that many small businesses asked, well, isn't this part of my software package, the security piece? And so we have to be more prescriptive. So when we're looking at the federal agencies, and this is where I think the increase in resources to CISA is going to play a significant role, as well as the new leadership working in collaboration across agencies to create a synchronized effort that educates the agencies on the priorities and also creates a unified government approach so that you don't have agencies looking to others to understand what's happening, but that there is leadership both within the White House and within CISA that helps to streamline what needs to happen, because the threats are certainly consistent across all of our agencies. And I think, as Chris Inglis, the new National Cyber Director, said, in the context of the international arena, but it certainly is in the domestic arena as well, in order to get one of us, you have to get all of us. And I think that approach for government needs to hold true.
Thank you. And Ms. Nichols, what were the most common services requested by small business owners in the transition to telework because of COVID-19?
You know, I would like to say it was cybersecurity, but that was not it. And it was mostly sources of capital because they were concerned about how they were going to make and keep their doors open. Confidence to survive, trying to find out how to handle their financial projections, as well as the logistics of employees, internet connections, suppliers, and commitments. Cyber was not that one thing that they contacted us about. And while it was their greatest need, it was not what they contacted us about.
Ms. Nichols, the SBA rolled out several COVID-19 programs in 2020. Did any of these programs provide cybersecurity-specific guidance?
To my memory, neither the EIDL nor the PPP programs provided cybersecurity-specific guidance. The PPP was primarily for payroll, followed by other items such as rent and utilities, and the EIDL had an allowance for accounts payable and other bills, but not specific to cyber unless it was already a related expense.
And thank you. Ms. Cornish, with respect to CAMI's directory, what is the importance of including the designations or certifications small business may have as part of the company information?
Sure. So part of it is, for subcontractors and prime contractors and even government agencies to better diversify the government contracting workforce. Additionally, when our companies are looking at their own DEI plans, many of them want to incorporate diverse vendors in that pool as well. So we are excited to, help support those efforts through our designations.
Thank you. And do you think that including such designations can promote diversity in cybersecurity contracting?
Absolutely.
Mr. Default, recent security breaches have heightened the importance of continuously monitoring against outside threat, but the necessary technologies and practices are too expensive for small firms. How much on average is the cost to secure networks?
That is a great question. It is one of the main areas of focus that a lot of our member companies have to pay a lot of attention to. I'm not sure exactly what the cost is per small company, and it probably varies as to what kinds of tools you want to adopt. One of the observations of one of our member companies is that for a lot of really specific cybersecurity focused tools that help you manage your threats across your supply chain, the number of licenses that you have to buy is really high. And so it's kind of, you have to buy in bulk. And this particular member company just signed up as a reseller so they could get access to a smaller number of licenses. And so that is potentially a problem and a potential area of focus here to provide more federal resources so that companies can buy smaller and not necessarily in bulk access.
And what can SBA and its resource partners do to help remove barriers for small firms that want better protection?
That's a great question, Chairwoman. There are a few things that you guys can do. We were really happy to see Congress introduce HR 1648 and 1649 last Congress. These are bipartisan bills that would help ensure that there are liability protections for information sharing with the government, but also to provide more resources for small companies through the federal government, through the SBA, to have access to cybersecurity counselors. And so that was HR 1649, which has a certification program for SBA employees. So access to that through the SBCDs is something that we feel would be a great improvement and would help them.
Thank you. My time has expired, and now we recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lukemeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Default, one of the things that's concerning to me is the cost to be able to protect the small businesses out there. And so it's a two-part question. The first part of it is, what would be the average cost that a small business would have to anticipate incurring to be able to protect themselves? And then the problem becomes, well, you've got to protect it today, but there's a lot of smart guys out there that are going to figure out how to break into the security you got right now, so you're going to have to continue to update your security, and you're always behind the curve, so to speak, here in trying to protect yourself. And so these ongoing costs are sometimes things that I think deter small business from even, they just throw their hands up and say, well, I hardly can afford the first set of security measures. I sure can't continue to pay money out the door whenever they're really, I think my exposure is small. How would you answer that question?
So it is a great question, Congressman. I think, one of the member companies described the cost of just trying to get penetration testing, which is kind of an entry-level set of services where an outside firm comes in and tests your network, tests the integrity of the security systems that you're using. And that can cost between $10,000 and $30,000 according to the member company. And that's just the one-time cost, and that's just for that service. So if you want to buy the full suite of services, it goes up from there. Now, we also have member companies that have worked with other customers that have had trouble putting together $200 to pay for antivirus software, which is the lowest, sort of the lowest level tool that you can invest in. So it ranges quite a bit, I think, depending on the kind of company you have and your focus and whether or not you're seeing these threats. Another thing I'll point to is the IT Sector Coordinating Council. So this is at DHS has various sector coordinating councils where they focus on cybersecurity in different sectors. The IT Sector Coordinating Council did a survey of small businesses, and about 38% said they don't expect to see a cyber incident in the next 2 to 3 years, which is a little bit of overconfidence, I think. And so there is a baseline level of sort of an appreciation that you have to have in addition to the amount of money that comes along with the basis for spending that kind of money on these protective measures. So on an ongoing basis, as you point out, it's even harder.
Thank you. Ms. Cornish, you talked about a tax credit that was put together by, I think, the state of Maryland, I think you indicated, which is intriguing to me, but I was curious, what kind of participation rate was there among the small businesses, and what was the average cost that they actually were able to get a credit for? Or do you know that information off the top of your head?
Sure, I can speak a little bit to that. So it certainly is not it's not utilized to its full potential by our small business community. So we know that there's work to do on our end to help promote that as well. I think to Graham's point, many of the cost range between $5,000 to about $30,000. There are ways to do continuous monitoring that's a little bit less expensive on the defensive side. So that would only cost about $6,000 to $10,000 a year.
Okay. One of the things I think, Mr. Default, I think back to you again, I think somebody else talked about the number of folks within the industry were 3.5 million jobs, or 3.5 million people short to be able to fill the number of folks. What's the problem here? We just don't have enough people interested in the field. The wages are too small to attract people into it. Nobody likes to do that kind of work. What do you think?
There are a number of different factors. Some of it is cultural. There is a lack of, I think, awareness of the available jobs when you're going into college. And when I was going to college, there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on sort of STEM fields at that time. So there's sort of an outreach campaign that could be done to make sure that folks know that this is where high-paying jobs are. It's $89,000 median salary for this kind of work here in the U.S. across the country.
Let me interrupt. My time's about up here. Is this something that small business agent administration could do? They could entice or enhance or send out information to the high schools and folks, colleges, to let them know that there's availability of all this. I mean, we have to get the SBA engaged in this somehow because this is a small business issue.
I think that's a great idea. I think that there is definitely a role for a small business administration there. There are other federal agencies that ought to be involved, but small business administration in particular, because small companies do have trouble finding access to qualified folks.
My time's expired. Thank you. I'll yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For more than 20 years, the SBA Office of the Inspector General has listed IT security as one of the most serious management and performance challenges facing the SBA. So this is not obviously a new thing, but it's more acute and becoming more of a problem as particularly nation-state actors and others weaponize the ability to go after our small businesses. Recently, I reintroduced the bipartisan Sba Cyber Awareness Act, which would direct the agency to issue an annual report assessing its cybersecurity infrastructure. It also requires the SBA to report cyber threats, breaches, and cyber attacks to the respective House and Senate small business committees, and then to notify affected individuals within 30 days, because we know that notification is one of the biggest issues, is there just isn't the required notification. So that's part of it, but even after the notification, then there's the issue of what happens next. And in all of your testimonies, you referenced the challenges, particularly facing small businesses that just don't have the resources. So, Ms. Corner, starting with you, can you flesh out for me a little bit more what resources are available, or what could have the biggest impact on providing resources or support to small businesses, particularly in high-tech sectors? Like I have a lot of defense, aviation, and aerospace within my district, and a lot of those are small businesses, and they are prime targets of hacking and intellectual property theft. What's out there, and what could make the biggest impact that is not out there?
Sure. So in the defense industry specifically, there's the Defense Cybersecurity Assistance Program, which provides funding for assessments. And honestly, investing in the assessment and the protection phase is really where you're going to get the largest ROI for the SBA and others. So I would certainly encourage investment there. When companies are breached, it definitely it varies by the situation, but certainly shoring up, interventions to improve your chances moving forward are critically important there. So I would love to see, that the DCAP comes down from DoD. I would love to see other agencies also, do something similar through their Office of, Small Business work.
Thank you. Ms. Todd, Mr. Default.
Thank you. One of the key issues that we focus on at the Cyber Readiness Institute is human behavior, because it recognizes that regardless of the sector that you're in or the resources that you have, you've got to start by creating these cultures of behavior. And if we make the analogy to safety, creating cultures of safety that we did with businesses, particularly following 9/11, it helps us to understand that while this is all new to us and it is somewhat foreign and uncomfortable, we often say security is not convenient, we can create those cultures. And by doing so, you have force multipliers in your companies when every individual recognizes that he or she can be an access point to the network, that he or she can be the strength that actually prevents an attack, or can be the opportunity. And I think that's one of the pieces in the education that we've got to be focusing on to help employees have that accessibility to those resources and the knowledge.
Yeah, Congressman, and I agree 100% with the comments of Ms. Tote, because all it takes is one weak point in a company or in an organization, and that's why you saw with some of the recent cyber attacks, they used the password spray, where they try really common passwords on a large number of accounts, because chances are in an organization of a couple hundred people or a couple thousand people, somebody will use password 123. And so creating that culture that Ms. Tote described is extremely important. And also understanding which kinds of threats are being directed to your specific industry, because they're kind of, as I said in the oral statement just a minute ago, the attackers are sort of studying the everyday habits and trying to mimic those, and they do a pretty good job of that based on specific sectors. So info sharing within sectors is extremely important.
Thank you. And Ms. Nichols, to you, and to, I guess, to that last point, since you're within SBDC, on the training piece, training of employees and others, how can we better do that or assist small businesses in conducting that training?
So we are basing our model on the DoD cybersecurity model, the CMMC, but just using the CMM portion of it. And I liken it to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically, on level 1 through 3 is basic cyber hygiene. And it's all about education and awareness. We're also, I think it's very imperative that we look at what is our consistent voice and what is that consistent messaging, because there are a lot of resources out there and a lot of organizations. And I believe that the consistent messaging and education and training is very key, not only just for employees, but potential employees, because there needs to be that standard base, and education is really the end information.
Thank you. And my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Representative Roger Williams, the vice-ranking member of the committee, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A 2021 cybersecurity trend report showed that phishing is the top cyber threat for small businesses, as we've talked today. In this type of attack, simply clicking on a link or opening an attachment can compromise an entire company's network. Rather than target a vulnerability within the cyber network, this tactics targets unknowing employees. Regardless of what additional resources or best practices are shared with the industry, we must ensure that we are not leaving out the socially engineered attacks that can occur on untrained employees. So, Ms. Nichols, first of all, are you aware Mississippi State has a great baseball program?
Yes, they do.
That's good. Secondly, can you discuss the training that SBDCs, and we've talked about this a little this morning, have to ensure employees are aware that they could be targets of these phishing attacks?
Specifically targeting employees, is that what you're asking?
Uh-huh.
Yes, and it's just a matter of awareness. Just like I said in my presentation, our organization had been phished, and it is raising awareness of that basic, what to be ready for, and what are the very basic minimal things that you have to look for. And that's what we want to show our small businesses, is how to prepare their employees to work remotely, but also keep their intellectual property and their information safe. So it's the social engineering is really the focus of most training that's going on right now. And while it's at a higher level and you hear about the big ones like the pipeline and different things that have happened. It's the smaller phishing that is really affecting the smaller businesses. So education is key.
Thank you. Thank you. When small businesses are targeted with cyber attacks, it may not make the news like some of the more high-profile cases we've seen lately, such as the Colonial Pipeline or Microsoft attacks. Unfortunately, since many of these smaller companies operate on tighter budgets, they are often easier targets, and then the intruders can go to undetected for a long periods of time than some of the more established businesses. So, Mr. Default, you mentioned in your testimony that smaller firms could leverage the cybersecurity capabilities of cloud services. Can you elaborate on the advantages of using this service and why it may be more attractive option for smaller firms who do not have as large of a budget to dedicate to cyber defense?
Absolutely, Congressman. It's a great question. As there was testimony earlier this year in the Homeland Security Committee where witnesses sort of elaborated on the capabilities that cloud providers have in contradistinction to where you are using on-premises hosted servers, right? Where if you have your own servers there at the small business, it's incumbent upon you, the small business, to install updates that could have security patches. It's also incumbent on you to sort of, on your own, go out and find threat indicators and indicators of compromise, whereas all of that stuff sort of happens quickly and efficiently if you have cloud-hosted, if you're using cloud-hosted servers, where the updates are sent automatically that patch potential vulnerabilities, and you also sort of benefit in real time and quickly from indicators of compromise that other folks are seeing that are using the same cloud services. And so that's sort of what I'm referring to when I say the ability to leverage those capabilities.
Very good. Cybersecurity breaches are only going to become more common, as we know, and technology continues to advance and criminals get more sophisticated. While small businesses do what they can to protect themselves from and ensure attacks that never happen in the first place, it's ultimately the government's responsibility to track down and hold these bad actors accountable. If we use every tool at our disposal to hold these criminals accountable, it will deter these attacks in the future. Ms. Cornish, are there any roadblocks that we are preventing the federal government from more aggressively prosecuting cyber crimes?
To my understanding, no. But I do.
You believe that?
I'm encouraged by the partnership, the public-private partnership that we're continuing to discuss, because I do also believe that that is part of it. But I do not feel like I can speak to the roadblock specifically at the federal level blocking that.
Well, public-private partnerships always work better, no question. I yield my time back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired and the gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland, Representative Mfume, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Contracting and Infrastructure, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I've got a question that any of you or either of you who may know the answer should feel free to address. With respect to cyber attacks, what do you estimate the average loss to be as a percentage of overall revenues to small businesses, regardless of their size?
So based on research and studies that we've conducted with some of our member partners in the larger global companies, we estimate that a cyber breach can cost about $4 million per small business. So when you think about the revenue that small businesses have, sometimes that doesn't even cover their revenue, and the number of employees, whether it's 220 or 200, the significance of that piece. And I think the challenge for small businesses is their awareness that they are an access point to larger companies, but that they also hold data. And data, a couple years ago, surpassed oil as the most valuable global commodity. And I think these issues for small businesses require the education so that they're not in a position where they're paying $4 million to respond, because the recovery takes quite a long time.
And so how many small businesses does that wipe out on an average per year?
So there are different statistics around this, but what we saw with the pandemic is that over 65% of small businesses that suffered a breach did not go back online 6 months later. So that given a 6-month recovery time, those small businesses did not recover. And I think one of the things that we've learned, again, a lot from our large member companies is that the recovery piece to this, it's like a hurricane. We get very involved in the crisis response. It's on the front page of the paper. We're looking to see how everybody's doing. But when you go back 6 months later into the community, 12 months later, you're seeing long-term and devastating impact. The same is true for businesses, particularly with ransomware attacks, because of the impact it has.
And what about 5 years ago? What would you have said that same dollar amount would have been?
So I would say it would have been a lot less. I can't estimate, but I think, and I don't even believe that small businesses were the target that they are today.
Yeah.
What has happened with IoT and the interdependencies of the digital economy is that small businesses are such critical parts of global supply chains that now, to the point that we've all discussed, they are a target because they're the weakest link.
And because of that, do any of you know or are aware of the number of states that offer the kind of tax credit that Ms. Cornish referenced earlier?
I'm not aware of others. I don't know if,
I'm not either.
I do
So-
think it's something the federal government could look at.
So let's talk about Maryland, since we know about that, Ms. Cornish. You said that that tax credit is being underutilized.
It is.
Why do you think that is?
I think partially there's an under-awareness among users as well as cybersecurity companies. So we certainly have the cybersecurity audience, so we will continue to promote among our membership and also among our, strategic partners and other trade associations and such.
Yeah, I think it would have to be an aggressive sort of promotion if you've been around offering the tax credit and people aren't taking advantage of it, and yet they're being hit by these attacks that we just heard could just completely wipe them out. How are you going to do that over the next few months or so?
Yeah, I can certainly reach out to our close partners at the Department of Commerce because I do believe it's a state-driven approach as well.
And I don't know how much time I have left, but what, if any of you, think the SBA should be doing to lower the threat level? You got some concrete suggestions for us?
I'll take that one, Congressman. That's a great question. I think the SBA could, number one, provide personnel and a certification program for SBA personnel to get up to speed on the latest cyber threats and be in a position to counsel companies from SBDCs, and then provide some funding for those programs on an ongoing basis. That's a great way to do it because SBDCs are a great resource that folks use quite a lot. And then the SBA could also create sort of a hub for information sharing, a little bit like what CISA does through NCIC at the Department of Homeland Security. And so those are two ways that small businesses could be better supported and help them on a more cost-effective basis deal with cyber threats.
Mr. Default, I get the sense that you have more than two ways to suggest, so that could you write those down and transmit those to the committee? I want to specifically try to follow up with the SBA to make sure that those sort of suggestions get heard outside of this committee room.
That's excellent. Absolutely. We'll do that.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota, Representative Hagedorn, the ranking member Subcommittee on Underserved Agricultural and Rural Business Development, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and the ranking member and for holding this committee. Thanks to the witnesses. Mr. Default, one of your members is in our district in Rochester, Minnesota, southern Minnesota, Advantage Software, and it sounds like they've had a great business for going on 40, 50 years, providing farmers with real-time data on inventory and doing all sorts of things that production agriculture. It really makes a big difference in that type of thing. So we appreciate that work and all the other members that you have going. Quite something. It seems to me this might be one of these areas again where big government, some politicians think, let's impose standards. Let's force the small businesses to do all these things to comply in order to do business with the government, and it becomes unreasonable, the mandates, and then they turn around and say, well, let's subsidize it. And it's kind of a typical pattern that we see. But one of the things that bothers me is I'm concerned that the agencies sometimes require the contractors, the smaller businesses, to comply and do things that they themselves don't do. I mean, I'm one of 21 million Americans who had their records stolen from OPM, communist Chinese, I guess, know whatever they want to know about me, and yet nobody could be sued. There was no liability. The government has a different standard than they impose to others. Do you think small businesses who work in good faith with the government provide the information, do what they can in order to protect themselves and the business operations. Do you think they should have a liability standard similar to the government where they're not sued?
Congressman, it's a great question. I think it points to two things. Number one, federal agencies need to probably do a better job when it comes to securing their networks, and I think that points then to whether or not my member companies and other businesses across the nation are willing to share threat data and share potentially sensitive information that shows what the threats might be with federal agencies. They don't want that information to be breached. And then secondly, the other point that you made, whether or not there ought to be some sort of liability protection for information sharing and other measures that my member companies and other companies like them take to make sure that other companies are ready and that other folks in the sector are ready. Absolutely. I think CISA is a great start. I think that other legislation that was introduced last Congress and that I think hopefully will be introduced again this Congress would ensure that there is additional liability protections for small businesses because we have to overcome the reputational damage, not just, as my fellow witnesses pointed out, the initial problems.
I think that most businesses have real incentive to make sure that they can protect their customers and do work. They don't want to lose business. They don't want to go broke. They'd like to be able to continue to build their businesses. So your industry is quite fascinating. You said something like $1.7 trillion, all these millions of employees, and that there's all these open jobs, 3-4 million open jobs, some of which are paying 50, 60, 70, 80,000 just to get going. Can you walk us through what the average person in your industry would do in order to be trained up or get education? And how are some of the small businesses, are they working with them to try to bring them in and pay for some of that?
It's a great question, Congressman. Some of our member companies have just developed their own training programs because they need access to more folks that will write software. And so one of our member companies in Denver created a coding academy, and they sort of focus on cybersecurity measures and secure coding, because I think that's one of the things that training programs are trying to emphasize right now. Write software that's secure at the beginning. It's sort of like what the Federal Trade Commission says about privacy by design. If you're designing a software product, build security into it. And so they've developed training programs that have specific focuses like that. We also have a member company, BitSource, in Kentucky, that's sort of specialized in training former coal miners to code so that they would have a bigger workforce base.
So one bill that I've introduced is the American Workforce Empowerment Act, which would enable people who have 529 education savings accounts to use that for an array of different purposes, not just to go to a four-year college or whatever. It seems like there could be areas here where folks could utilize those types of monies in order to get into your industry. So I'd encourage folks to co-sponsor that bill and try to get things moving for you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Now we recognize the gentleman, Mr. Phillips from Minnesota, the chairman on the Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigation, and Regulations for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Cornish, you mentioned the DoD program that makes funding available to contractors to perform assessments and take steps to defend against cyber threats, of course. And we all know that large firms like Intel and Google engage in what are called bug bounty programs that provide rewards for identifying security threats and vulnerabilities on their own platforms. And just last month, CISA launched the first federal civilian security vulnerability disclosure program. Well, that needs an acronym, I think, to work with the hacker community to secure its networks. So would you support the establishment of a fund at SBA or NIST or CISA to support small businesses that want to partner with bug bounty programs and identify and repair weaknesses in their cyber defenses?
Certainly, that's a wonderful idea.
I like those easy answers. Thank you. Ms. Todd, how do you feel about that notion?
I can continue to make it easy for you. Absolutely, because I think small businesses need to be told not only what to do, but what's going on and the reasons behind that. And I think that the bug bounty programs help to demonstrate where the threats are coming from. And as Graham said earlier, if they can understand that approach, then they have a better education for their employees as well as for the businesses themselves.
Wonderful. I appreciate that and happen to feel the same. Ms. Nichols, I want to thank you for your services that you're providing to your community. You're bridging the gap for a lot of businesses who need guidance about how to protect themselves and their customers from malicious attacks. Not long ago, I chaired an oversight and investigation subcommittee hearing that examined the challenges facing small businesses seeking to adopt the CMMC certification and enter into Defense Department contracts. At that hearing, we learned that when the initiative is fully implemented, it has the potential, the likelihood, to shut out small firms who lack the expertise or resources to navigate that certification process. So if this committee considers legislation empowering SBDCs to lead cybersecurity outreach to small businesses, how would you recommend that we instruct SBDCs to incorporate guidance about CMMC into their outreach and training?
Thank you for the question. So last year, our association embraced the CMM model, and we really recognized that we will not ever provide the certification piece of that, but we felt that the levels 1 through 3 is something that we could embrace on education piece. And so we've worked with our association to develop the training models to prepare the small businesses so that they would be prepared, maybe not just for the DoD or defense contracts or contracts with the federal government, but also just the general small businesses. So to prepare the SBDCs, I think that we're already on that pathway because we did recognize that this would be a good partnership. And I hope that answered that question.
No, it did, absolutely. Yeah, and I just want to thank our chairwoman and ranking member for holding this hearing. I can't help but think that this issue is going to grow in importance, and it is our responsibility to ensure that small businesses can defend themselves and, of course, their customers. So with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muser, Ranking Member, Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to our ranking member. Certainly an interesting conversation, interesting hearing. In 2020, I think it's no surprise to any of us that ransomware attacks were up double, over 102%. So let me ask, let me start with Mr. Default, if I can. The cyber attack, cybersecurity insurance, I understand is through the roof as far as expense goes. So is there any group plan that any of your organizations perhaps work to try to bring down that cost and create that as an opportunity for businesses?
I think absolutely. Thank you for the question, Congressman. Cybersecurity insurance is very expensive. I think Ms. Tott might have a good handle on this as well, but for our member companies, they're looking for affordable options here, and they're looking for, and also as Ms. Tott pointed out, $4 million is what it costs a small company to have a cyber incident, and so the level of investment and the frequency with which our member companies are targeted kind of leads us to believe that, well, we're going to have to invest a little bit more, even though we're small companies. And so I will just say that, they're willing to invest a lot in cybersecurity insurance and in other measures, but we're definitely looking for those plans that will be sort of group plans or other ways of making the risk pool a little more affordable.
Okay.
If I may add to that,
Please, yes.
so I think cyber insurance is it's a challenging sector right now. The Cyber Readiness Institute has focused a lot on it this year. The challenge is that if you're a small business and you don't have cyber insurance, you're often seen as being negligent. But if you're truly evaluating on an ROI perspective, it doesn't always make financial sense. Right. There's a great opportunity for the insurance industry to step up to say, you have to do these basics in order to be covered. That will both help the premium stay down and will also create a momentum shift in doing the basic cyber standards without having to talk about regulation or anything like that. It's the choice. It's like a good driver discount. If you do well by these standards, then we'll cover you. And I think that's where the insurance industry really has an opportunity to improve what it's doing.
And you'd imagine the IT companies as well would find some protection measures by charging for added security. And I know that is certainly occurring as well. In my district, it's not like any other. I have many small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses getting hit, some more than once. Some pay, some don't, and they work their ways around it, but usually at quite a cost, sometimes just being shut down for 6, 7, 8 days. So it's a serious issue. I want to just backtrack for a moment. We had a hearing with the Department of Defense Cybersecurity Maturity Model a few weeks back, and we saw that small businesses that made for the defense industry had, it was very difficult to get the type of levels of security that they wanted. In fact, I have one business in my district that spent over $100,000, and they're not even exactly sure what level that they are. They think they're at level 3. So it is discussed in the Mississippi SBDC how small businesses would I guess my question is, are your models helping gain compliance for the DoD?
So ours is through education and training, because we can't, and we can also provide guidance so that we could say, you know, here's our situation. We can give them some information. Again, we cannot provide that certification, but that education piece, and we've really outlined it so that it's very clear. We've created training specifically. Right now, all it's posted is for level 1, because we believe that's basic hygiene, and it's raising that awareness. And to reiterate, it's important that they have that basic understanding so that they can get that certification. A lot of people don't think it's attainable because they don't understand. And if you can educate them that it is something, it can be very simple, but yet very effective to get them to that level 1 through level 3.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ms. Nichols.
Congressman, if I may just add a quick point to that, because we're actually working with Cyber Hawaii and the Department of Defense to create a primer to help small businesses get ready for CMMC. And it's taking that point where most small businesses are, which is with no understanding, and getting them ready for CMMC. And it's a model that we hope to be able to replicate across the country, because it addresses the points that you're calling out, which it can be very costly and take a lot of time without the right preparation.
Last quick question. I'm out of time. Does cryptocurrency affect this whole situation?
I think an unregulated monetary currency that is being used for a malicious and criminal act cannot be expected to be a positive force. If we're using cryptocurrency, it should be regulated along other international monetary sources.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentle lady from Illinois, Ms. Newman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member, for putting this discussion together. Very helpful. And thank you to our guests, illuminating and really helping us understand the gravity and depth and width of this problem. So mine is pretty simple, my line of questioning, and I think it's likely for Mr. Default or Ms. Todd. And so we're looking at all these things to help small businesses. I think all the suggestions today have been fantastic, and we should look at it as a committee for sure to see if there's legislation there to support small business. My question is the other lane, so deterrence, right? So how is the SBA and all of these organizations represented here working with law enforcement, whether it's FBI or CIA, once these attacks occur? Are they following them? Are they tracking them? Are they investigating what's happening there? And then do you have any suggestions around deterrence? And what would that model look like? And so I'll ask Mr. Default first.
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I think when it comes to deterrence, one idea that we talked about here and some of the witnesses mentioned was sort of creating a clearinghouse for information sharing through SBA, but perhaps co-locating it with Department of Homeland Security, so that it's rapid intelligence sharing and that the federal agencies are on the same page. With that kind of apparatus, that kind of says to cyber criminals, well, I guess there is a good mechanism in place for folks to learn about what I am trying to do to deceive my intended targets. And that in and of itself can be a little bit of a deterrent, because suddenly you're talking back to cybercrime as a business, you're increasing the cost of the attack. Because you might have to do a little bit more to try and trick that one person that you need to fool to get into the network. So that can go toward deterrence, and sort of co-locating the SBA center with DHS can help advance threat sharing, and SBA's role as just sort of a facilitator of information getting to law enforcement agencies is maybe the appropriate role for SBA as well.
And then Ms. Todd?
Yes, building off of that, I think when we can share the techniques, tactics, and procedures, the TTPs, with other businesses, then they're aware of what needs to happen. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've had is, and we saw this with Colonial Pipeline, when Colonial didn't share what was going on, the government was not able to then distribute that TTP that was being used. And that oftentimes what we learned from large businesses, we can apply to small businesses. And so to Mr. Default's point, sharing the TTPs, also, when we talk about deterrence, we have to prosecute criminals. What the biggest challenge we have right now is that ransomware is going to continue to be a very lucrative business because you can do it without getting prosecuted and have any repercussions. And so particularly for small businesses, this is one of the challenges. And this is also why reporting incidents, and also when there is ransomware that particularly small businesses have to pay to stay viable, being able to share that with the government so that you can help to prosecute the criminals. This gets us to a better place. Obviously, we've talked about all the liability protections that come with that, but we're only going to be better if we have better exchange of the attacks that are being used and the tactics and the techniques.
So if I may follow up, and either of you can answer, is it that small businesses are not reporting these, or is it that when reported, they can't be investigated for whatever reason or aren't being investigated? Is it both or is it either?
And
I could
go first.
Yeah, Congresswoman, I think it's both. There is a real reluctance, I think, among small companies to notify authorities and to notify maybe others of either an unsuccessful or a successful attack, especially the successful attacks, because there's sort of an automatic conclusion that folks draw fairly or unfairly that the company that is subject to a successful breach wasn't taking the proper measures to secure their networks. And so there is a lot of under-reporting, I think.
Yeah. I think that needs to be a part of any communication or kit that any of your organizations put out, SBA puts out, and we can follow up. And if you can include those recommendations in the recommendations that Congressman Mfume talked about, I think that would be great for the committee to take up as a whole. So I do appreciate your work, and thank you for sharing today. And I yield back.
The gentle lady yields back. Now we recognize the gentle lady from New York, Ms. Tenney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Velazquez and Ranking Member Lukemeyer, for this. And to our witnesses, I really appreciate you being here. I have a couple of questions. First, Ms. Cornish, in your testimony, you described your newest initiative surrounds the critical lack of skilled, diverse cybersecurity professionals to protect critical infrastructure and essential services. Do you find that this shortage is in urban and rural communities, and how can we meet those needs? And I'm particularly curious because we are looking at rural broadband in our communities and trying to do, based on a municipal level, just like we have municipal electricity and others, and that is going to be particularly interesting to us as we move into that realm. And how is that going to be something your task force is going to be looking into?
Certainly, I think that's a huge challenge, the lack of broadband, especially in rural communities, especially when you're thinking about small and medium-sized businesses and really how the workforce is distributed, right? You want to make sure that your rural areas are still competitive for that. So our main task in the workforce initiatives is really to connect the dots. We have 17, centers of excellence in Maryland alone for cybersecurity, yet we have 19,000 unfilled positions. So for us, it's really creating comprehensive and wraparound services and connecting those who are doing the training with those who really need the work. And to the point made already, in small businesses, it can be really challenging to take on that training yourself. It can be challenging to have the manpower to do that training and to support that. So we're really looking to see how we as an association can take away and kind of pool together all of our resources to put less onus on the small businesses who really need that workforce.
Right. More and more our small businesses are going to be depending on this rural broadband that we're trying to explore. And actually we have a test site in my own community of Sherburne, New York, where we're going to be having a municipal broadband opportunities, which we are trying to do anything to minimize the risk of cyber attacks, which is my concern. And also on this, and I'd like to address it to the other witnesses. I know that there is SBA is going to be designated as the single federal entity for the small business cybersecurity information sharing. I have a concern, though. I come from New York State, and there was a point in time where we consolidated all of our services, including all banking and insurance, into the New York State Department of Financial Services, and we felt that that could put us at great risk for cyber hacks because the government typically doesn't have, and the taxpayers are paying for maintenance of this when banks were spending billions of dollars to protect their customers because of the liability. I know insurance was referenced before. How can we make sure that SBA is going to be able to handle this kind of burden and making sure that our small businesses are going to be protected when you're consolidating this type of issue? I don't know if you want to address it, either Mr. Default or...
Sure, Congresswoman. It's a great question. That is one of the reasons that you see some hesitancy among the member companies and other small companies that are being asked to share data with federal agencies. Their question is, well, we've seen the recent headlines where other federal agencies, and maybe SBA, have been the victims of compromise. And so they want to be assured, basically, that these federal agencies are taking the steps that they need to take to ensure that that data is protected adequately and that all of the personnel that work at these agencies are observing the proper protocols, because as we've discussed throughout this hearing, all it takes is just the one employee that doesn't that has the weak password or that otherwise makes the wrong move to compromise the network. And so anything that the committee can do to ensure that there are greater resources, more accountability, and other levers that would ensure that the agency is taking the proper precautions, those would help our cause quite a lot.
Yeah, thank you, because I'm concerned as a small business owner. We obviously spend a lot of money in making sure we don't get hacked. We have a lot of heavy data downloads in our business, and so to be hacked at some point and finding out that it's SBA without any duplication of protections, or redundant, storage areas, where are we going to be? And that concerns me. I don't know if anyone else wanted to weigh in on that.
If I may, Congresswoman,
Quickly,
yes.
I got 30 seconds left.
Absolutely. I think certainly there's always when we talk about a single point of success, it's also a single point of failure. But that is really what the new money and the new authorities for CISA are supposed to address. And I believe if we look at agencies, SBA isn't going to be the only agency that has this type of responsibility and this type of challenge. And so what we should expect, and you're seeing some of the beginnings of this happen already, which is looking at how CISA will work with the agencies to ensure that there is that redundancy and that resilience built in. Because as we know, small businesses can't afford to not have that safety net. But again, with those additional authorities, this isn't going to be SBA on its own. It'll be SBA in collaboration with the other cybersecurity infrastructure in the federal government.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Great testimony. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back, and now we recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. And I think I'd like to follow up on many of the different lines of questions that we've heard today. They all seem to have a real common thread. One is to try to understand how much of all of this has to do with just changing culture and changing the ways that people perceive their responsibility and their role in cybersecurity for their companies. I'm trying to suss out, that seems to be a very large part of the problem. And then kind of the other 20% of the problem seems to be what kind of software and hardware that you should have and you should invest in, the types of teams that you should have to be able to protect from the rest of the 100% of the universe. My understanding is that's in the thousands of dollars of range and cost. My understanding is that the consequences is in the millions of dollars of range and cost. My other understanding, having run and owned and operated a lot of businesses and been responsible for IT, is that there is a need for seats or logins for some subset of software that people don't have the ability to afford. Is there any sort of universe where imagine a cloud, imagine, certified or approved vendors that are part of that cloud that the Small Business Administration can administer, or some other organization can administer, that would allow you to pick up logins rather than seats, so to speak, to be able to defray the costs that small businesses are experiencing in their cyber security. Is that something that already exists and I just don't know about it? Is that something that could be useful to design? Is sort of a clearinghouse of software that would defray the cost for smaller businesses? And I guess, Mr. Default, you seem to be doing most of the conversation on that, and we'll start there.
Thanks, Congresswoman. it is a good idea, and I think there could be a role for SBA there, whether it's providing just a grant program or funding or something more hands-on, where the agency is sort of designing a fulsome sort of program. So I think it's worth discussing. It's a good idea, and I think we would want to just continue to engage on this because it is just it's a need that was identified sort of by a couple of our member companies, and that I think it's worth further discussion probably.
Okay,
at this point.
thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Todd?
Thank you. It's actually something that we're hearing from small businesses at the Cyber Readiness Institute, because we don't advocate for vendors, but we're hearing we need to have a clearinghouse to know which ones to turn to, or at least the general categories. And it's something that we're looking at this year, because we want to be prescriptive and not leave everybody in the dark, and recognize that when you outsource the function as a small business, you still have a responsibility, and you don't outsource the responsibility. If I may address your question about culture, I do think this is the 80% component of cybersecurity, particularly for small businesses. And cultural change takes a lot of time. If we think about, we've all heard the analogies, seatbelts, it was inconvenient for a long time, and then you saw the safety requirements. Or if you even make the analogy to physical hygiene and health, we're not doctors, but we've learned over time from doctors that we should have certain tests taken on a regular basis. And so you don't need to be an IT specialist to know that these are the basics that need to happen. And we've talked a lot about workforce training. And to your point about culture, I think it's important when we see all these cybersecurity positions that people out there recognize it's not just about math and science. Cybersecurity is interdisciplinary, and we need capabilities and qualifications in sociology, history, politics, psychology, that those all play into this, so that the workforce that we're talking about for cybersecurity is much larger than I think we conceptualize, because it's not just math and science.
Excellent. Ms. Cornish, anything?
Certainly, we have experience curating these lists by business verticals and also specific needs. So if you would like to speak further about building this clearinghouse, I'd be happy to answer that more specifically.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And with what's left of my time, I want to focus on a piece of legislation that I'm a co-sponsor of, the Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act of 2021, which would certify 5 or 10% of the number of employees of a small business development center to provide cybersecurity assistance to small businesses. If enacted into law, this program would provide expertise to small business owners on the proper steps towards cybersecurity. With my last waning seconds, what are some of the best practices that SBA could showcase their cybersecurity efforts on? Do you know also similarly of best practices that the DoD has had? How can we encourage interagency best practice sharing?
If I may, this is what the Cyber Readiness Program is. We focus on 4 issues: strong authentication, which is a passphrase of 15 characters or more; phishing training, not using USBs, but instead looking at the cloud; and software updates, helping individuals understand that every 24 hours they should actually download the patch. Those are a foundation, and I'm certainly happy to talk to you more about that, because this is the core of how we can help small businesses, and I commend the act and the legislation.
Thank you. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Gentle lady yields back, and now we recognize the gentle lady from California, Ms. Kim, Ranking Member Subcommittee on Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Chairwoman Valdez-Garza and Ranking Member Lukemeyer for holding this important hearing. And I want to thank the witnesses for being with us today to discuss the ways of strengthening our cybersecurity for small businesses. You know, I'm very troubled by the increase of cyber attacks, which seem to be designed not only for monetary purposes, but also to instill distrust in our economic system and our institutions. Just between 2019 and 2020, our country saw 400% in cyber intrusions. Successful cyber attacks on our small businesses also discourage future entrepreneurs from establishing a small business and creating jobs. Some estimates say that 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a cyber incident. So let's think about that. Cyber attacks are putting 6 out of 10 of our entrepreneurs out of business. So given this urgency of the moment, I was happy to join my colleague, Representative Crow, to introduce the Sba Cyber Awareness Act to find ways to improve the SBA's cybersecurity infrastructure and share information with Congress if there is reasonable basis to believe that a cybersecurity incident occurred at the administration. Let me pose the question to all witnesses, but let me start with Mr. Dufault. In your testimony, you indicated that threat sharing for small companies is complicated because usually they lack the resources to join and participate in information sharing and analysis centers. Can you elaborate on what can Congress do to incentivize higher participation of small businesses in ISACs?
Thank you, Congresswoman. It is a difficult task to create an incentive that would really cause small companies to participate in a robust way in these information sharing enterprises. And one of the ways that we can at least start on that task is to provide potentially additional liability protections at least, right? Because the couple of issues that small companies face when they're being asked to share information about the threats that they receive or even incidents that they are victims of, is that, number one, the reputational fallout will cost quite a lot of money over and above the cost of actually remediating the breach. And then number two, it's just a matter of, am I going to be liable for anything associated with sharing this information, whether it's a privacy cause of action or just simply that they didn't take the precautions necessary to protect their networks, and therefore they run afoul of data security laws in the states or at the federal level, the Federal Trade Commission Act. So it's the liability and the reputation, and so a good start is to help them defray some of that potential liability.
Ms. Todd, could you briefly elaborate on that too?
Thank you. I think the other piece is that when we look at the supply chains that small businesses are a part of, there is a responsibility on the larger companies to work with them to incentivize, because those large companies, as we saw with SolarWinds and Kaseya, can be taken down if the small businesses are vulnerable. And there is a better infrastructure of support that can happen within supply chains. And I think as we've seen the interdependencies grow with the digital economy, this is another opportunity to incentivize that engagement, that threat sharing. We work with large manufacturing companies, and one of them has put out very specific efforts and information to their small businesses to help them understand where the threats are, but also to facilitate that sharing, because they know that as a large company, if their small businesses get taken down, that will affect them. So there is more responsibility and collaboration that can happen across supply chains than we've seen before.
Thank you very much. I'm a big proponent of advancing STEM education, especially with underrepresented communities, to increase our 21st century talent pipeline and our economic competitiveness. So I'm sure you understand the importance of STEM education and computer science in training and expanding our cybersecurity workforce. How could our small businesses and our economy benefit from increasing cyber workforce?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Is one of the most significant problems my member companies face is access to folks that are trained in software development or computer science more generally. And so my member companies would benefit quite a bit, I think, from investments in K through 12 education, but also in workforce development programs. I mentioned earlier that some of our member companies develop these training programs on their own. But there is a role for federal investment as well, and that's why we support the Computer Science for All Act and also the Master Teacher Corps, which is a training program for K-12 educators to provide computer science education.
Thank you. I see that my time's up. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Now we recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes. Mr. Carter, you need to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair and Ranking Member, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity for this hearing. Much has been said and many questions have been answered. But Ms. Cornish, if you could perhaps touch on this, and any other member, maybe Ms. Dot can as well. We know that we obviously are concerned about small businesses. And making sure that they have the security to operate their businesses via internet, and cybersecurity is certainly an issue that touches us all. But we know that large companies, I know my credit card has been breached several times with large companies. I won't say what the company is, but I'll say that it's been breached And I know that they have all of the algorithms and all of the security known to man to secure them. I know that cities have had their systems breached. The city of New Orleans has had ransomware. What have we learned from what the large companies are doing that we can pass on to our smaller businesses, best practices, if you will? Even at their highest level of security, they've still been caught in ransomware and cyber security threats.
So I would reiterate the importance of human behavior and training of our staff and our employers, because they are in addition to being our largest threat, they're also our largest defenders. So we can empower them to treat data care instead of cybersecurity, and empower them to protect the data they're entrusted with. Additionally, I think the thing that hasn't been belabored here a lot, but is documented policies and procedures. There are many holes that we are missing simply because there aren't checklists, or we don't really understand all of our assets that we're managing. So I think documentation and training is key in this.
But could you elaborate if we talk about the larger companies that have a robust security system where they are empowered with significant tools to counteract these threats, yet they are still caught in the lurch, if you will? What can we as Congress, what can SBA, what suggestions would you give us that we can aid in this battle? Because obviously, in many fronts, we're losing.
Sure. I think Ms. Tott's outline of the Cyber Readiness Institute does a great job at how we can empower our employees, because again, that's really our biggest threat.
Ms. Tott, can you weigh in, please?
Sure. I think, the good news and the bad news is that these large companies are getting breached by very basic attacks. So when we look at Colonial Pipeline, they were breached because they weren't using multi-factor authentication, and they actually didn't need to shut down the pipeline. They were just worried about getting paid because their payment system shut down. And so that showed the interdependency of the systems and the importance of separating IT technology with your operations. And so those lessons, the sophisticated attack of a nation state adversary is separate and distinct. But when we've seen the other issues with SolarWinds and others, those are getting breached through authentication, through network access. And so what we're talking about for small businesses, obviously at a smaller level, really holds true for the large businesses as well. And that's where I think we've learned the most from these breaches over the last 6 to 12 months, is that we've got to create those basic standards in helping businesses do all of those. And this is, again, we talked earlier about where I think insurance companies can play a role, and others to have those incentives so that those basics become a requirement for further resilience.
And real quickly, before my time expires, as a member of Congress with tons of small businesses throughout my congressional district, what can we do in the way of town hall meetings or ways of better educating our small businesses in our communities to utilize these resources? Are there leave-behinds? Are there handouts? Are there things that we can do? We often do town hall meetings for various issues. This could be one that certainly can benefit our small businesses. What suggestions would either of you have as to how we can better serve and provide resources? About 43 seconds.
What we've seen and what we're hoping to see with CISA and with SBA is this collaboration of resources focused on human behavior. So taking the work of the nonprofits and making those available to you so that when you go to these town meetings, there's a simple, accessible, basic protocol of these are the things you need to be doing on your personal devices as well as your professional devices. An education campaign that does this. One of the points in my testimony talks about an awareness campaign. If we get every business to use multi-factor authentication, the decrease in cyber attacks would be exponential.
The gentleman.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
And now we recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Ranker for holding this hearing. As the ranking member on the Cybersecurity Subcommittee, Department of Homeland Security Committee, I've learned a lot over the last 6 months about cyber attacks and ransomware. Which is why I've worked on several pieces of legislation. And Ms. Nichols, this question is for you. Yesterday, I introduced H.R. 4515, the Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act. I'm honored to have the support of my fellow colleagues on the committee here, Mr. Evans and Ms. Houlihan, and I encourage others on the committee to co-sponsor this bipartisan piece of legislation. Small businesses often lack the resources or technical knowledge to prevent cyber attacks, and with the high cost of hiring specialized employees and cybersecurity experts, it can be difficult to bridge the sizable education gap. My bill would help small businesses get the information they need to implement their own cyber strategy and take appropriate steps in the event of a cyber attack against their business. Ms. Nichols, given your position as the State Director of the Mississippi SBDC, would you share your thoughts and provide feedback on the bill, the Small Business Development Center Training Act, please?
Thank you. I have not reviewed the whole bill. I was given a little bit of information this morning in regards to that. However, just like Ms. Todd and several of the other people said, communication and education and a consistent messaging is very key. And I think that raising those awarenesses and to be able to be that voice for the small businesses and give them that information, I think that we're at this time where we need to create those base standards and create an information, I don't want to say an overload, but be very consistent in how we provide the information to our small businesses. And as an SBDC, we have to serve all 82 counties of Mississippi. And so it's not just rural, it's every aspect. And it doesn't matter if it's a small business, medium-sized business, or large business, they're still at risk. And I think it's very important, and we appreciate that the government is passing this legislation, or is attempting to, and proposing these bills, because it's so imperative that our companies are prepared for cyber.
And we feel that since you already have the employees and having coming up with this program where your employees are, or at least a number of them are trained to address these cyber issues with small businesses, especially ones that you're helping develop and create and get started up, that this would be very helpful. I want to move to Ms. Cornish and Ms. Todd. You talked about, in your testimony, Ms. Todd, you talk about doing a tax credit. Ms. Cornish, you run an agency that deals with tax credits. One thing I have seen is major corporations and governments can spend a lot of money on cyber security. Small businesses, smaller governments, they can't hire a dedicated person. And it's not just about best practices, making sure that you change your password. That's one thing that we have to do. And CIS has been great with that and coming up with best practices of what businesses and small governments should do, local governments should do. But there's also a cost of keeping your system upgraded. You can't just buy the best piece of equipment today, because 6 months from now or 3 weeks from now, it's going to be outdated. That's a heavy cost, especially for small businesses. Is a tax credit the best way to help offset that cost? What is the best way to do this? And Mr. DeFall, you can jump in too if you have an answer.
For us, it was a great place to start. But certainly, I think there needs to be more financial incentive. Perhaps I heard some mention of grants, projects to get that off the road, because, as you mentioned, it does take money to maintain it, but there's certainly a lot of startup cost that could help defray as well.
Tax incentives are certainly not the only answer. One of the things that we were looking at, particularly with the pandemic, was could you use some portion of the PPP loans that could turn into a grant if it were used towards cybersecurity? And so looking at the tools available to small businesses for money to incentivize them to allocate a percentage toward cybersecurity. And I think it's a piece of the pie in all of this, and we've just got to find those tools that together can help incentivize small businesses to be motivated to invest and to understand why they need to be, that the role that they have in their vulnerabilities.
I'll mention, Congressman, it is a great question, and we are supportive of H.R. 4515. When we were preparing, it didn't have an H.R. number yet, but happy to see that, and we are supportive. We were supportive last Congress, too, of substantially similar legislation. So tax credit is a great idea. We also, I also don't want to underappreciate what our member companies rely on when it comes to software platforms, so app stores and operating systems, and the ways in which they harden those systems and ensure that unvetted software is not accessing personal data, not accessing device features and things like that. These are baseline practices that software platforms use and that our member companies sort of rely on at this point to ensure that there is protection from threats in the mobile space in particular. And so that is a piece that I think we want to make sure is on the record here. And so to ensure that the committee is sort of on the lookout for proposals that would make it harder for companies to use those measures.
The gentleman's time has expired, and now we recognize the gentle lady from Georgia, Ms. Bordeaux, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our witnesses for joining us to discuss an issue that really is top of mind for many small business owners and large business owners, which is cybersecurity. In my home state of Georgia, we saw what happens when critical infrastructure is not secured from cyber attacks, when the Colonial Pipeline attack left many of my constituents high and dry at the gas pump for several days. But the Colonial Pipeline is just one rather extreme result of cyber vulnerability. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas said at a recent event that 50 to 70% of cyber attacks are aimed at small to medium-sized companies, costing an estimated $350 million in 2020. And this threat is not going anywhere anytime soon. Ransomware attacks against smaller businesses have increased 300% over the past year. Listening to some of the testimony and discussions today, it occurs to me that there's several ways that you can approach this. And there's a lot of great ideas out there about how to change the behaviors of small businesses, training, all of that kind of outreach. And that's very, very important. But one other way to approach all of this is to require the software that's sold to small businesses or the products that are sold to them to be more conscious of security and ways to protect from breaches. And so just wanted to check in with, I guess Mrs. Tott might be a good person to talk on this. Are there recommended practices for software developers or for people who are selling to small businesses to help protect them from cyber attack?
It's an important question, and it's something that we've spent a lot of time looking at. So to your point, right now, the market does not incentivize security. It prioritizes first to market, convenience, ease of use before security. As a result, we're seeing software go to market that has holes and bugs in it that are that's not being secure. When you look at the research that's been done, it is absolutely possible to build secure software, but the economic incentives aren't there. So I commend what the Biden administration has done in the executive order, which is to look at software transparency, a software bill of materials to understand what goes into it. But as a nation and as a government, we have to create, this is where I do think regulations and standards around building secure software need to be discussed, because right now, if you look at where the vulnerabilities are coming from, often it's because of holes in the software. The Kaseya attack most recently was a result of that. And we have an opportunity to, we call it secure by design, choose your phrase, but the idea is building that safety and security. Again, if we use the car analogy, we wouldn't think about building a car without an airbag anymore. And we've got to be thinking about safety and security when it comes to software and hardware development.
Thank you. Again, just to point out, it's very, very difficult to change individual behavior at massive scale to deal with security. It's much quicker if we can catch it early on through the product itself. Just kind of on that vein, and I don't know, Ms. Tott, maybe you'd have an answer on this, or Ms. Cornish, what's being done in terms of the policing side of things? So one of the things we see an awful lot of is we have these attacks, and then we get out from under it somehow, we deal with the ransomware situation, and then what kind of policing capacity do we have or do we need to build up in order to bring people who do this to justice?
This is a huge gap in our defense right now, because criminal actors are getting away with a lot of attacks, and whether it's a simple lone wolf in the United States or it's a nation state, but we have to be able to prosecute criminals who are committing these types of actions. If you think about Colonial Pipeline again, if someone had put a bomb in that pipeline to prevent the gas and jet fuel going to the East Coast, we would have no qualms about what to do with that individual. Essentially, by shutting down, I live in Virginia, so I had a similar, we saw the lines a few blocks down the road. There was an impact, and it was a psychological impact because people were afraid. And when we look at that type of impact, we have to think about what are the repercussions for these types of actions. And I think this is something that the United States just shouldn't do by itself. This is where we would look to cooperate with our like-minded economic partners, our allies, to understand what are the boundaries and the law and the lines that are being crossed for criminal actors, and what are the consequences for this type of activity. Because even though we're not seeing the immediate devastating effect, if we look at SolarWinds, the repercussions continue to cascade. And this is why we have to create those boundaries and the definitions around what is a criminal act and what are the consequences for that act.
Thank you so much. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stober.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Lukemire, for holding this, and to the panelists who spoke with us today. Very informative. You know, as we've seen over the last few years, cybercrime is becoming more and more common. The cyber attacks affect our small businesses both directly and indirectly. Most recently, as we talked about, the Colonial Pipeline was hacked by the Russians and created a huge gas shortage in the nation. Small businesses that relied on any sort of transportation or travel for daily operations were adversely impacted. While big businesses have the capital to proactively protect themselves from cyber attacks as well as recover from them, small businesses do not have that same luxury. And so, to the panelists, what can the federal government do to help small businesses protect themselves from and or recover from cyber attacks? And does this assistance need to look different for small businesses with 10 employees versus 100 employees and so on? Mr. Dufall, go ahead.
Congressman, it's a great question. Congressman Garbarino and Congresswoman Houlihan mentioned a bill that they just introduced, which I urge folks to support, H.R. 4515, which would require a Small Business Administration to develop a certification program for SBA employees and then to deploy them to SBDCs, Small Business Development Centers, and to provide cybersecurity expertise and counseling for small companies in the area that they cover. And so that is one thing that the federal government can do, and a little can go a long way in that respect, because a lot of small companies use SBDCs as sort of a clearinghouse for help in a number of different ways. Now, if you had personnel there that could help with cyber readiness, but also, as you said, remediating after a breach, that would be very helpful, and that's something that the federal government can do specifically for small companies.
And I think that it's important to get that small business back up and running as soon as practical, because the days, I mean, you're losing a lot of money each day. The other two witnesses would like to comment on that question, please.
Sure. In addition to the piece of legislation that was introduced, which, just to reiterate, I think really calls upon the resources of the Small Business Administration by using SBDCs and the effectiveness of that. One of the things that we recommend in a white paper, the Cyber Readiness Institute, earlier this year, was an opportunity to curate the resources that are out there. There are a lot of nonprofits, a lot of organizations that are looking to help small businesses. But if you're a small business, and this goes to another question that's been attacked, you often don't even know who the first call should be. Right. Is it an IT provider? Is it the local police? And just being able to provide a prescriptive roadmap for small businesses on incident response plans, as well as what to do when attacked, I think that this is something that CISA, in coordination with the SBA, could just provide a resource and curate those tools to help small businesses.
Well said. Ma'am?
I would just add to that, having a documented incident plan, as mentioned, is not often enough. People are in panic. They have, they're not taking the proper channels. So supporting something or exploring something like we have in Maryland as a federal cyber SWAT team, or, even organizing it maybe at the SBDC level to have a response line to support small businesses when they are going through a breach, to connect them to the different types of resources they need.
Yeah. And my last question, and this is specific to cybersecurity. Specific. What would you caution the government from doing? Mr. Dufall?
One thing that comes to mind for us is, I mentioned this a minute ago, where a lot of our member companies are specifically concerned with security in the mobile space. So what measures are we taking to harden our devices and to prevent unwanted software on our mobile devices? Because these mobile devices now have very sensitive personal information on them, healthcare information, financial information, and then real-time location data. So all of the measures that software platforms take, software platforms like the app stores and the operating systems, to ensure that unvetted software and software that hasn't been reviewed for security flaws is not inadvertently downloaded via clickbait or some other vector. Those are really important measures to be able to take. So I would caution the federal government not to overreach on antitrust, for example, because these are companies that are larger firms that have a lot of customers, and they're sort of in the crosshairs right now when it comes to antitrust. There are proposals in House Judiciary that would make it illegal to take those measures to prevent access to personal data on antitrust grounds, and we're very concerned with those proposals.
Thank you. My time is up, and thank you very much, and I appreciate this opportunity. Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentle lady from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne, ranking member, the Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigation, and Regulations, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Velasquez and Ranking Member Lukemeyer. Yesterday, the Biden administration announced China was to blame for the sweeping cyber attack on Microsoft earlier this year that left hundreds of thousands of small businesses vulnerable to cyber intrusion. Then just a month ago, Russian hackers were able to cripple operations at both the world's largest meat supplier and one of the largest pipelines in the United States. In 2021 alone, cybercrimes could cost $6 trillion, which would make it the third largest global economy. Cybersecurity, for a number of reasons, is very, very important for small businesses, both real and rapidly intensifying, as we've heard today. It's the new way for our adversaries to wage war. Companies need to be ready, and we must determine the appropriate role for the federal government in prepping the businesses that we serve as the engine of our economy. And while the need for improved cybersecurity is clear, adding too many requirements can be overly complicated and counterproductive. And one example is the DoD's new cybersecurity assessment framework, the CMMC. Last month, the Oversight Committee, which I serve as the ranking member, we held a hearing to review this program. And one image that just stuck in my mind is the sheer amount of paperwork that was needed for a small business to complete just to be certified. One of the witnesses held up this 3-ring binder that I swear took him 2 hands to hold up because it was just so intense. And pretty much most of their guidance was coming from LinkedIn because DoD and SBA simply weren't helpful. So, moving forward, we need to make sure that we have simple framework, which is easy to understand, but also companies need to know how they can be secure, who they can turn to for help, and how to respond when they're attacked. I want to thank the witnesses all for being here today, but I also want to reiterate my concern that we're discussing such a significant small business issue without a representative from SBA present. And if we're going to have a collaborative solution to address this matter, it's crucial that SBA is here to at least demonstrate their willingness to discuss their plans, and I hope they can join us in the future. Ms. Nichols, in your experience working with small businesses, when they have an issue regarding cybersecurity or they get breached, who do they typically turn to for help? Is it the SBA or a private partner, and who do you believe they should turn to?
That's a good question. When they get to us, they are really not sure who to talk to. They do try to reach to a private industry and to have help with that. And then because they don't initially think to refer to the government, specifically SBA, because they don't know the resources that are there. And we would like to change that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. In your testimony, you said the average time, this would still be from Ms. Nichols, you said the average time to identify and contain data breaches is around 120 days. 280 days. Can you explain why it takes this long and how Congress can help to shorten that period?
Well, it has to do with they have to find it, and they may not be prepared to figure out how to do that. So they have to hire, and it's very expensive. And it's just like any other IT issue. You have to roll out everything that's going on. And again, I'm going to default to this. I am the state director. I don't run the department. And it's very challenging because when you deal with a small business who knows nothing and they have a data breach, that wasn't what their initial concern is, because they're delivering service, they're trying to make money. And so they're trying to still stay in business. And mitigate that data breach and get past that. So that's just going alongside the business. And I'm looking at this as a business approach. It does take a long time because they're not going to shut down while they try to deal with this. They're going to try to keep it as far under the table as possible and just keep moving forward. And it does take time.
So
just like it does take time for any other type of disaster.
So no, I wasn't being critical that it took so long. I'm asking how can Congress help to shorten that period?
Ooh, I don't know. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, I wasn't being critical. This is how long it takes. So what can we do to help? Mr. Default, overall, small businesses are unprepared when it comes to cybersecurity. A recent report stated that 70% of small businesses are unprepared for a cyber attack, and only about half are allocating any money towards cybersecurity. With small businesses running on such tight margins, especially after a pandemic, how can we make it easier for small businesses to be prepared without breaking the bank?
It's a great question, Congresswoman, and again, I go back to HR 4515, which would provide some expertise via the Small Business Development Centers for cybersecurity, and by creating a certification program in-house at the SBA, you are creating a federal resource that can be that can reach a lot of small companies via on-the-ground folks that are at the SBDCs, and so that would go some distance toward helping ensure that folks are aware of the current cyber threats, but also the best practices that Ms. Tott has referred to on authentication, software updates, and just training around social engineering and phishing scams. So that's what I would point to.
The gentlelady's time has expired, and now we recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I don't want to rehash some of the earlier questions and kind of discussions, but let me go back to the idea of the cloud and the applications associated with it. So maybe, Mr. Default, you could comment. Obviously, when COVID-19 struck, many of the businesses moved to remote work, and seemed like the only way for them to kind of survive what was going on. But they did switch up kind of their cloud applications at the time, and in some instances that may have helped them streamline kind of their business practices, and they may adopt those permanently now, right? But it also increased the security risk is the assumption that's being made by some, not all, who think maybe that isn't the case, but. Do you share those concerns? And, I think it's something that small business specifically struggles with because of not necessarily having the resources and the personnel and the ability to kind of track this on a regular basis. So I just wanted you to maybe comment on that.
Well, I think thank you for the question, Congressman, and it's something that we are concerned about. As more work is being done, more education is happening remotely, certainly during the pandemic, and as you said, going forward, more commerce, I think, in general, is going to be transacted in the cloud and on smart devices. And so it does point to the need, as I mentioned earlier, for us to allow software platforms like the app stores and the operating systems to take measures to remove and keep out side-loaded software. That is, where you click a link accidentally and it downloads something onto your device. Those measures in place to keep that software off of the device are really important. I would also point to the fact that, for example, we've got a member company in the Minneapolis area, Vimos, that provides remote services for restaurants. So you can split a check just with one click on your handheld device. I think there is an assumption that if more of that is happening online and over the internet, that there are more potential attack surfaces. And so I think that observation is correct, and that should cause us and your committee to look closely at what the opportunities are to ensure that the threats are adequately being dealt with, and that small businesses are taking precautions.
And some of these managed service providers, they're going to have to adapt kind of new standard operating procedures when it comes to, cyber hygiene, right? So I'm just wondering, how far behind the 8 ball are we on this stuff? And because it came at us so quickly, and now trying to adapt to it's probably going to take a while, right? I mean, we just don't have the ability to make this kind of do a 180 like small businesses being asked to do.
Well, one thing that came up earlier in the discussion was, are people at greater risk if they're using on-premises servers? And that's not necessarily true. And to your point that folks are using the cloud a little bit more, and one of the aspects I pointed to in my written testimony is the fact that if you are using off-premises cloud services, then you do have access to faster patches and updates for software updates that can address the newest threats and the newest vulnerabilities. And whereas if you have on-premises servers, you are manually installing those updates, and you're trying to keep up with those threats manually and on your own. And you also don't have access to sort of the real-time updates for indicators of compromise that others are experiencing that are using the same cloud service. And so from that perspective, we may be in a little bit better of a position to the extent that we're relying more on cloud services, because we have better access to real-time threat sharing, and we have better access to real-time updates to software. So that is one dynamic that sort of cuts the other way that I wanted to point out.
Very good. Thanks for being here today. I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Well, thank you again to our witnesses for being here today to testify on this critical topic. Your words have highlighted the significant risks that small businesses face without adequate cybersecurity measures. With more entrepreneurs online and more bad actors looking for targets, cyber preparedness has never been more important. Today's hearing has made clear that Congress must take an aggressive approach to shield small businesses from cyber attacks. It is also vital that federal agencies and the private sector continue to collaborate on resources, training, and technical assistance to understand and reduce small businesses' cyber vulnerabilities. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make this happen as we consider 3 cybersecurity bills at our markup next week. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statement and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there is no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.